the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we're headed to my favorite intersection of two neighborhoods in Manhattan, right where the West Village meets Soho, to speak with my friend Rebecca Gordon. We have not seen each other in ages, but we were just together on a panel about Saturn and Neptune. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jen. It's so good to be here. Yeah, and I want to say it could be even like a decade ago or something since I last saw you in person. I don't know. It was ages, though.
It was ages ago, but still a wonderful time. And I will never forget walking with you through the streets of Manhattan, going to a New York astrology event and just geeking out about what we love.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Oh, yeah, that was the book launch party. That's right. Yeah, that was a fantastic panel, too. We both did on Saturn Neptune. Great to be here. I've been listening to your show for so long, and I'm happy to be on here now. I know we talked about this when you first launched a couple of years ago, so I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
Absolutely. And so, just to get straight into it, what was your first astrology book?
It was actually Parkers Astrology, though there was another one that I really am kind of embarrassed about. It was that big purple one. I think it's the only astrology book you'll ever need.
You say big purple one, and I'm looking around the room at CAELi going like, there is that astrology book purple. Like, which big purple one? There's a lot of them, actually.
Let me see. Yeah, the only astrology book you'll ever need. So I had both at the same time, but I really fell in love with astrology with Parkers.
So how did you get this book? Like, how did it fall into your lap?
I was babysitting at a neighbor's house.
What? Just course of events. When did you then take the leap from reading those books and then learning astrology?
Well, it was actually that night when I was babysitting at a neighbor's house, because up until the age of like 13 or 14, I was just into astronomy. And I was also into things like Carl Jung and the I Ching. And I was also learning about the tarot. So it was sort of all of these spiritually adjacent areas. And I'd been an astronomy nerd since probably the age of 4 or 5. Like, I had tons of astronomy books as a kid. So I was just like, I knew everything about the Kuiper Belt and Andromeda and how many moons Jupiter had. So I was really steeped in all of that, plus reading Carl Jung, plus I Ching, and I hadn't yet discovered astrology, which would be the one substrate that would like put it all together, you know?
Amazing.
And so, yeah, I was just babysitting at a neighbor's house one night, and kids had went to bed. I opened up a book. It was a medical book. Of course, I'm a Virgo. And then I found Parker's, and then I found a whole lot of other books at her house, love science and everything. And I just like opened them all up, and my mind was getting blown. So she came home that night, basically, found me.
To this like astrology library unpacked on the living room floor.
Yeah, totally. The kids were asleep, and it was like 10:30 at night. She just looked at me, and I looked at her, and it was like that moment of knowing. I was kind of like, we got to talk. Yeah, so her name was Margine, and she was an astrologer, basically. She was like, oh, you found my books. I'm like, yeah, we got to talk about this. Let's talk. Come on. Like, this is a big deal. And is this real? How does this work? This is crazy if this is real. I mean, life has a map. Why didn't anybody tell me, you know?
That's a little how I felt when I figured it out, you know, also as a teenager. I was like, why isn't this being taught in schools? This is literally like the answer.
Exactly. That was my exact thought too. Like, this should be taught everywhere when we're in like 3rd grade. Like, hey, you have a map for life. Did you know that? We each have a separate map, and you can just follow it and learn about yourself. And, you know, there's certain times when it's great to jump and whatever. So she basically mentored me. So that was the beginning of my education. So like I was 14, and that night she started teaching me a little bit before I went home back to my dad's place. And I told my dad about it. I was just like, what's going on? My dad is an academic, and he was like, well, you should write a paper about it and, you know, try to prove it wrong and this and that. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So I did that. And
try to prove it wrong. And then you're like, oh, no, I can't, though.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was a little skeptical. I was like, do you think it's right? He was like, well, you can try to, you know, prove it wrong. Because I was questioning it myself, being a little skeptical Virgo, I guess. So I got all the books out of the library, found all the crazy historical context, and I was just like, okay, Mesopotamian references and Egyptian, Chaldean, everything. I was sitting there, 14-year-old. My mind was blown with stack of books on the dining room table. And Yeah, so that's where it all began. And then I started doing my grandmother's chart, my dad's chart, and I started seeing correlations genetically through the lineage. You can see patterns that weave through, like the rising sun sign correlation. And so, yeah, I was just taken. And then I studied with her like every Sunday night through high school. And then she became my stepmother. She married my dad.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
So like the astrologer moved in. Sure.
Like, I'm keeping you now forever. I love that.
Yeah.
And I also love that, like, it sounds like when you were doing your family charts, the way you put it made it sound like you kind of were already grabbed by the medical strand of astrological tradition.
Oh, definitely.
Like looking at that idea of, oh, well, here's my family and the genetics of our lineage is going to be shown through these chart factors. That leads like very quickly into looking at medical.
Absolutely. So, and also she was steeped in medical astrology too. So she had some old medical books that I fell in love with because I was like, okay, how come I'm come from a lineage of all Leo risings, like Leos and Leo risings? That's interesting. That's not by chance. And they even marry into that too. It's just funny.
A pride of Leo risings. I love that.
Totally.
So good. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pop you out to a deserted island and you get to take 3 books with you plus an ephemeris. What is in your bag?
These are all astrology books.
You can pick any books you want. I love the astrology books, but if there's an important book that's changed your life, that's welcome too. There have been guests who speak about, books that are not directly astrology, but that make them a better astrologer.
Yeah. Okay. So a desert island. First one I would have to say is Cosmos and Psyche for so many reasons, but I could basically turn to any page in that book and be pretty enamored with a swath of history and reality. Another one I chose was Bernadette Brady, Book of Fixed Stars. I love Bernadette. I love the way she explained things. I feel like she's a scientist and a poet in many ways. And another one is a book that I've never read, admittedly. And I don't know much about his book, but it's Chris Brennan's book, Hellenistic Astrology, that I thought, okay, I'm on a desert island. I'll have a lot of time. I haven't read it. And, I'm interested. I'd like to see what that's all about. So I would probably pick those 3 astrology books to start with.
So going into Cosmos and Psyche, I've had guests who say they've read it a bunch and they just can't live without it. And then I've had guests admit that they haven't read it at all and like they'd use the island time to read it. So how embedded are you in the Cosmos and Psyche text?
Good question. So I have a little story with that book. When my grandmother wasn't feeling so well, my uncle and I were like both kind of camping out of her house and helping with things. We're both staying there together. And he arrived. I was already at grandma's house and he brought me this book. And up to that point, my family had been always giving me astronomy books for my birthday because they thought, okay, she's an astronomer, or whatever. And this was the first so this was like a big deal because this was also a family realizing, okay, there's astrology is something that Rebecca's interested in. And so I had just found out about the book at the same time. He gifted this to me and there's a personal note in it. And so I took it right away. And immediately I was just like struck with the patterns of history. And I love history. So first of all, I could read history books all day. I'm obsessed with history. I have not read every word of this book, but I will often turn to certain sections when I want to know about a certain swath of history. And I just have a lot of books also on like the history of Africa or America and things like that. So it kind of does a lot for me in many ways because I appreciate looking at patterns. And then, okay, when this is happening again, and the question for me is always like, can we do this differently? Can we do this Pluto and Aquarius thing differently? This is how we did it last time. And how much is knowing about what went wrong there, how we overdid that? How much is that awareness going to inform the future? So I'm always like reading it with that kind of context of like seeing the pattern and thinking, if we actually discuss this and like shine a light on these things that happened, kind of like a planetary conjunction went into overdrive and it created a lot of chaos and calamity. Is there a way to not do that? I mean, this is a question with this kind of context always and looking at the cyclical nature. So
yeah, that came up for us in Adam's talk with the Saturn-Neptune panel because you said something about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I felt really like strongly like I have to share this because when I was living in Eastern Germany as a teenager, I was embedded in a small town that their only second language was Russian, so I had to learn German. And I got to know the town very well because there's not a lot of people, so you really are like embedded in, like, as an American living in suburbia, suddenly you're now in a place where everybody knows what your car looks like, and like anything you wear at school is instantly like, oh my gosh, why is the American wearing a skirt? No one else is wearing skirts today. And I'm like, you have to do that? That's a thing. But I got to know the East German sort of nostalgia for what had not come across after the wall had fallen, because there were stories at dinner tables and there were sharing various ways in which they had hoped that maybe some of the good things that ended up being possible in that state form could have been carried forward that didn't make it. And then I learned later, kind of towards the end of the year when I could understand people better because my German finally clicked into place, that like there had been this drive in the Monday demonstrations for an openness to considering that maybe West Germany and East German culture could open into like a third space and create like a totally brand new kind of Germany that wasn't what ended up happening, which is what you're saying right now about looking at these patterns. What can we do differently? What happened was West Germany colonized East Germany. And
Exactly.
that was that.
Jenn, that was actually my favorite part of the panel. And I could not stop thinking about that after you said it. Like that idea for a third party, a third door, a third way, third space, something new that was not okay, we're just going to do it the West German way. That's a great example of like what we're talking about with Cosmos and Psyche. Because like knowing, for example, okay, that Saturn, Neptune, Uranus all colliding in Capricorn, and watching that complete destruction and celebration, but also giving way to one side, not the other. So it's still a black or white, either or. And, here we are again in the Saturn, Neptune in Aries story. And it seems just as polarized. It's either this or that. And so I wonder in these times of tension, what happens if we take an extra pause and space and have that sort of those open roundtable discussions. And I always wonder, what if that had happened before the Industrial Revolution? What if there was another way to go if we hadn't just rushed to find an answer immediately and we had taken the time? And I think that there's some kind of like, of course there's a deep survival mechanism of like, okay, we need to find it right now and be the first. That's driven by ego and capital and everything. But, it would be a good moment if we kind of like, ironic to say, in the sign of Aries, to take that pause of,
yeah, right. But Neptune might be helpful there, right? Because it's like Aries maybe wants to do that rushing, and Neptune's like Big Lebowski, like, hey, dude.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe Neptune will have a lesson or two for Aries and in the pause and taking some space there before rushing to the answer.
Well, I think Rick's book really helps us collect an archive of, what you were saying is these cycles in history recurring so that we can meditate on them and read them and say, okay, well, this is what happened last time. And astrology, the way he's framed it, this archetypal way of looking, helps people get informed properly when they have those huge meetings, because they can say, oh, this isn't just like a fresh moment, like it's never happened before. Like, yeah, it's so challenging, I think, when people are not informed by astrology, for them to feel like, oh no, we're terrified, there's the unknown. And it's like, get an orientation, there's a map, like you said, here's the map.
Right. I mean, I really hope that one day the collective can be as informed with astrology as we are with history, because if we see like, yeah, right now that we're living in this time that's akin to the French and American Revolution, and seeing how all of these things turned out, and this two-party system, all of these things that we're dealing with, I do think there's an opportunity for a third direction. So hopes in astrology becoming more popular as it has, that eventually this part of astrology can also give way to collective decisions and governance someday. I don't know, but I mean, I could see just through looking at these patterns. Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate what that did for astrology, and I recommend this book to people that are kind of like doubters as well, because it gives historical context. Like I always start my talks with historical context. Like I gave a talk last night, And I referenced the American and French revolutions, as well as 1989, as all these things where we need to know what we're coming from. So I guess context is what I appreciate there.
Well, yeah, and then it hides in plain sight because people will feel it when you mention that. I'm sure even people listening now who might not be hardcore astrology enthusiasts. I hope I have listeners who are not hardcore astrology enthusiasts yet, but become that way. But like you say, oh, French and American Revolution, 1989. I feel that. Even if I don't know the astrology reasons why, I feel that, you know? You bring it up and you evoke that quality of emotion and it becomes like an orientation point for someone, and you become that guidepost for them because they're like, wow, Rebecca totally did it. That was the thing. That feels right, you know?
Yeah, I mean, as astrologers, I think we sometimes like overlook how important it is to give context to non-astrologers, like those grounding points in the past and history, even like the Statue of Liberty. What was that? Jupiter, Uranus, this freedom, and this all of these symbols and what they mean, and seeing the patterns. It's pretty amazing. So history is really important. I'll start every talk like that, just referencing whatever's happened and what's happening now.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. So let's move on to Bernadette, the second book you mentioned about fixed stars. I also love this book, but tell me why you love it. When did you meet the book? What has it done for you? You're bringing it with you to this place. Like, what's special about Bernadette's text for you?
I began studying astronomy way before astrology, so I was pretty versed in all of the constellations. I didn't discover this in high school, though, like I discovered astrology. I guess fixed stars came up for me actually through like the back, I want to say the back of Alan Oken's book or something.
Nice.
I was like looking at the back of another book and I saw all these star catalogs and it's like, oh, okay, what's that? And I just followed the breadcrumb trail and that took me to Bernadette. I started attending her workshops at conferences and I loved her presentations. I loved her whole cosmology, how she explained the villages and everything. So I was really taken by her as a teacher and I studied with her quite a bit. So I met her first, and then I got all her books actually right after at that conference. So what I love about this book is simply learning the history, the myth, the stories, and also just like the larger tapestry. Like it's not just the signs, and if we go outside of the sign of Cancer, we see the bear there. And why is the bear close to Cancer? We learn just like it's not this thin zodiac belt, this flattening two-dimensional pancake that we've created of the horoscope. Instead, it's this very alive, round, large, three-dimensional tapestry of reality and this vast story where you have like the royal family at the top and everything, and these really like primal things like the whale all in another part. And
yeah, nobody talks about Cetus. Come on.
Right? Nobody talks about Cetus. Right? But these are all like parts of life, like stories and myths that describe our reality. And it's just amazing, like spanning all these different cultures that you can see from the Babylonian star myths to the Greek. And I guess what strikes me the most is like how the Greeks were actually kind of patriarchal and they took all of the Mesopotamian myths and they were just like, and Perseus saved the day, but I like how the Mesopotamian myths are more animistic and the Egyptian myths. I like learning the early mythologies and so Starlore is probably my favorite because she references all of that as well as the Greek.
Nice. Yeah. And you also do something called Ecosystems Astrology. Does Bernadette's work inform your work with what you're calling Ecosystems Astrology?
Not really.
Okay.
That's actually informed more by like earth poetry and other books that speak about the elements. So It's just that's how I think in ecosystems. But yeah, I mean, I include fixed stars in my readings that are relevant. So I love working with the stars. What do you like about the stars, though,
Well, I'm just
Jenn?
thinking about the way you brought out the three-dimensional qualities of being in the whole sky dome as opposed to this flat pancake of the ecliptic, and a way that that could be like, how you are experientially aware of the moment. I mean, I'm going to say the moment of astrology, and then Jeffrey Cornelius pops up. I was like, but that idea of like when you're looking, like it's a more of an experiential situation and less of an intellectual move.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's almost like this vast story of life and all creation, and you're born with that unique measure being relevant and this little swath of reality over there. And then you combine those two, in a bowl, in a cauldron, and you turn up the heat and see what those star myths tell together. And we all have a few stars weaving through our whole story. But I appreciate how they speak a different language than planets. And the stories seem to like hit much deeper chords in our personal mythologies. Like every time I've told a star story to somebody, it can almost bring tears. Like it's felt so, so deeply. I'll never forget, I was leading a star retreat one time in the Berkshires, and we had telescopes. We were on top of a mountain looking at all the stars and talking about each person's star myths and the whole tapestry of the sky. So I was showing at the time Carl Jung's chart and the stars that were prominent in his chart. And this one girl in the back of the retreat, she starts crying. I'm like, I wonder why she's crying. What's going on? And she realizes she had the same star exactly in the same place as Jung. And when she was like 14 years old, she started this automatic writing thing and almost like channeling the Red Book, but she didn't even know about the Red Book. It wasn't even out then.
Wow.
And then to find out later about the Red Book and that she and Carl Jung had the same star, it's almost as if the stars hold these information codes that Jung and her happened to be open to at that unique time. It was just wild. So I think the stars actually do contain unique lineages of wisdom that we have apertures to pick up on.
Yeah, I think when you can share with someone what their heliacal rising star is, it can be such a guidepost for the cohort they enter in on. Because, angular stars will be very specialized to you, but the heliacal rising star is kind of like saying, instead of saying I'm a Libra, it's like, oh, I'm in the group of people born with this star as the heliacal rising star. And so we all have something to do about that star together. And you can recognize it as an appreciation of what their work is. Like, oh, I can see how I'm doing that star and how you're doing that star, but we're also both doing it differently. And like that I love too, is that idea of like, okay, let's give it a little bit of a very hyper local, because they are so much like the way the Parans work on the horizon, stars speak very specifically to certain environments versus others.
Absolutely.
And they'll be rising and setting at different times in different places. And so it just becomes a way of saying, like, instead of this popular, like, I'm a Libra, it's like, no. You're also someone who has this star speaking to you, and you might also be a Libra over here, but you were born in the Southern Hemisphere, and now you have that totally different, never rising or setting in the North Star as a part of your story. And then it becomes, like, richer for that experience,
Mm-hmm. I've seen people embody their heliacal rising stars more even after knowing them and taking more of a pride in that part of themselves. It comes to life in full saturation. And it's also interesting to look at the setting stars and the hearthstone stars at the base and all of the stars that measure different epochs of times in our lives. Seeing how they play out is so fascinating. But for sure, with the rising star stories, and that's how the Egyptians would be like, "What's your sign?" Like it was their, "Hey babe, what's your sign? What's your heliacal rising star?"
Right? Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so and the third book you said was Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology, but you have yet to read it, so that we can park for you'll have to tell me when you come back from your trip.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you after the desert island. I mean, I definitely haven't had time to read that in this life yet, but I will on the island when I go there
There we
because
go.
I'm very curious about it. And there's so many books that I want to read. I would love to read the Vedas. I would love to read all of these things. Actually, that's what I would like to read on the desert island too.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
We'll
yeah.
have to
So
send you a care package. How long are you staying there?
I will take Hellenistic Astrology, the Vedas. But I mean, this will just be great for reference because that night on the desert island too, I would want to just, of course, do some stargazing on my
Yeah.
own. So I think
Yeah.
Brady's will serve well for that. And I can perhaps do some star rituals with them and connect deeply to various stars.
Love
Yeah.
it. Love
So
it.
I think that
Okay.
will serve many purposes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So if someone were getting into astrology, where would you point them? Which books would you suggest they read?
I have quite a few books here. So back to my ecosystems thing. So yeah, I love working with the elements. It is the super foundational substrate to everything. And there's two books that I think do elements really well. The first one is Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements. I love Arroyo, Stephen Arroyo, brilliant. And there's another book that does a similar thing by the fellow New Yorker, Shirley Soffer. So those are both books that really lean into the elements. And I'll start off with this Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements. There are so many parts of this that I really love. One is like the different approaches to how and why astrology works. Like he kind of attempts to explain it from is it causal? Is it symbolic? Is it a holistic approach? There's an energy approach? Because I'm constantly thinking about this myself, how and why astrology works. And I think that anybody who gets into this wants to ask that question too. Well, at least I did. Like,
Yeah.
how does this all work out? I want to know the mechanics of it. And I feel like now quantum mechanics, with entanglement theory and complexity can actually describe a lot of astrology too. So I love that. I also love, of course, the elemental combinations in this book and the description of what happens when you have mostly air and water and the personality signatures of fire and air. I appreciate it going very deep into the foundational raw ingredients of a soup. Before adding too many ingredients in a soup, you want to fully taste, okay, what is tomato? What is that like? What is the pepper? Understanding each ingredient. And I think this goes quite deep into the various elemental combinations. And I think anybody studying astrology needs a strong foundation. The elements is where you want to start because the signs are all in elements. Eventually, the planets will be in signs that are in elements. And this book describes astrology as a language of energy. The planets as energy regulators and the signs as energy patterns. It just takes the zoom lens further back before we get into all the nuanced aspects and planets and signs. I think we have to take the lens further back into, okay, we're working with these larger substrates. I think that's important for a beginner to start with before getting into all the nitty gritty.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And the other one, it says the astrology source book. What is that?
Yeah. Well, it's Shirley Soffer does a similar kind of thing here where she dives into the various elemental combinations as well. And, it's talking about the signs. Also, she does a whole history of astrology in the beginning, which is fantastic. And the different planets, signs, the elements, how they work in the body as well. So I think both are lovely to start with. This speaks more to the mythologies behind the planets. And Jenn, there's just one more book. I can't leave the show without sharing the works of John O'Donoghue, one of my favorite Irish poets. I adore him and David Whyte. Specifically, there's many books, but some that I love that do map to astrology. One is called Beauty, the Invisible Embrace. Many know him through Anam Cara, but he writes poetry about nature and really makes you fall in love with this gorgeous world. Now, speaking back to my ecosystems approach and mapping to the elements, this book and all of this nature poetry has informed me perhaps more than anything. And I think that anybody will become a better astrologer and have a greater understanding of the human soul by understanding his poetic explorations of nature. What's interesting to me is how, he might describe a mist or the clay of the human body and all of these different ecologies and how the soul is found in all these different parts of nature. And I think his main point is that we are all earth. We all come from the earth. We are all made up of everything that is in the earth and sky. And Jenn, you might be the the wind and the fire rising, and the sparks flying. And I might be these sort of organized little herb crops on the ground with the seeds blowing around, and each one is symbolic of such a different purpose of soul, but it all begins in nature. So yeah, I love Joanna Donahue and just wanted to share that.
Thank you. That's beautiful. That's important to have that relationship to the deeper, the astrology gets us there on one level, but also we can get there just directly through that nature exploration. So thank you for turning me and my listeners on to this poet.
Yeah, and if you can, I love the audiobooks of Joanna Donahue and David Whyte because you hear their Irish accents and everything, and it's so lovely to just take a walk in nature and to listen to those. And that's really also informed a lot of the team building work I do, and thinking of all of these teams as like, interesting, how come everybody on this team is representing mountains? And perhaps they need a river. And how do we bring that in and invite that into this ecosystem? It's very interesting to look at groups of friends, teams, and families, and what ecology everybody creates when they all merge together.
I love that. And you also have written a book. Do you think that would be good for a beginner to get into?
I do.
Awesome. Let's talk about that one. No, because I just want to know more about your body and the stars.
Yeah. So I have a fascination with medical astrology. In fact, my first mentor, my stepmother, taught me a great deal of medical when I was in high school. So I was giving a talk back in 2012 and an MD was at my talk. And afterwards, she was like, wait a minute, can we have coffee? And so we had coffee. And at that coffee date, we came out with a whole book proposal together. So her name is Stephanie Marango, MD. She's a doctor in New York. And we basically wrote a book together that is a head to toe exploration of the body. So I would write about it from a metaphysical and astrological standpoint, and she would write it from an anatomical physical. So we would talk about like the head and what does the head mean and why does the head come out first, and Aries and affirmations and exercises and things you could do to strengthen the Aries energy within you. Or let's say you don't have enough Pisces and you want more, how to amplify the Pisces in you. So it's very like interactive.
I love that. Yeah, no, and I also think, for people who, you already know your body ostensibly, like in some fashion, right? You might not know the anatomy bits, but to connect that, sign basis and just, get the orientation through the body towards, learning astrology through your body. I think that's really cool.
Oh, yeah. We got reviews from so many different kinds of body workers and yoga teachers that say they use it in their classes all the time. So it's been a real guide for people that are working in various things, like from massage, Pilates, everything, yoga. And we had a bunch of press when it first came out for some reason. We were on like Dr. Oz in the news all the time talking about it. Somehow, like mainstream TV found out about it. So we got Dr. Oz would have me on quarterly to talk about 3 different signs. And then, that was the next season and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah. I really love how you've taken your work in astrology and become kind of a gateway for people to get into it from various facets of the world. So what are you working on now, and where can people find you?
I am RebeccaGordonAstrology.com. And right now I have been bringing astrology into various kinds of businesses and technology, corporations, and giving talks at non-astrology summits, actually, quite often. So really interested in making astrology more interdisciplinary, as we were talking about before, in regard to looking at patterns in history and talking about them and asking questions. What else could this mean for right now? And how can we do this differently? But mainly, I'm bringing into corporations for team building events and leadership development. So I've created a rubric that doesn't use, circles with all these lines and numbers. And it's really simplified the chart into graphic models, where all of the team members can learn about themselves and their other teammates and their strengths, what they're working on, and their best relational skills. So I do all kinds of like star breakers, icebreakers, teamwork, sessions, breakout rooms, and people come together, ultimately seeing how they can develop more compassion for each other, understanding, leadership, and work better together in the end of the day. So those events sometimes last like 2 days, sometimes they're an hour and a half, and I curate them uniquely to each team. So I've been flying around a lot in the country and in New York doing these over the last, I guess, since 2017, but it's grown so much. So the last year I've been doing maybe like 2 or 3 a month. And it's been so fun to bring astrology into all of these different verticals and areas of society that haven't really seen it. I think my talent is mainly from complexity to simplicity. I love taking something really complex and just how can I simplify that and make it applicable and usable for various kinds of people. And I think that's, in the end of the day, there's many great astrologers that are much more academic than I am, perhaps, but I think my talent is mainly making it applicable
I
to
love that.
most people.
Thank you so much for all that you do and for taking that energy and making your superpower applicable to the world, really, but also in areas, as you said, that are not so maybe astrology friendly yet, but because of your work, maybe become more friendly to it.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been really fun to do that, actually. And yeah, last night I gave a talk doing that too in a group that was architects and artists. So, yeah, I think that the world's very open to astrology now, increasingly more and more every year. So, I mean, we're here in a good time, Jenn.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life to share Within Orb your book picks and your heart and mind and perspective. And I look forward to more.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to connect with you here, and I love what you're doing.
Thanks for listening to Within Orb. If you loved this episode, share it with your friends, give it 5 stars, leave a comment. In Spotify, you can do that now. To learn more about the CAELi Institute and perhaps become a member or take a lab that we teach, please go to CAELi.institute. That's CAELi.institute. Thanks again to the E-Block Band for providing our intro and outro music, and also to Jen Brown of JJ Boots Productions for being an excellent producer. If you would like to have a podcast be edited like Within Orb, reach out to Jen. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next week.